Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was in Perth today with the WA Premier Roger Cook, announcing more than $350 million in joint funding to upgrade the St John of God Public Hospital in Midland. The PM sought to keep the focus on health in his first trip to the West during the election campaign. So will Labor be able to hold on to its new seats in the state? We'll ask campaign spokesperson Jason Clare in just a moment. Opposition leader Peter Dutton has been spruiking his plans to get more gas into the East Coast market to try to bring down power prices. He says details about when and by how much will be revealed before the election. Mr Dutton also claimed coal towns support his nuclear energy proposal, making the comments while visiting Tomago in the marginal New South Wales electorate of Patterson. So when will we see the modelling on the Coalition's plan for power prices? We'll ask the political panel, Michael McCormack and Barbara Pocock. And a high-tech Chinese research vessel is circumnavigating the southern coast of Australia, within Australia's exclusive economic zone. The Prime Minister says the Defence Force and security agencies are monitoring the ship, but he wishes it wasn't there. Staying with one of our top stories this afternoon as a Chinese research ship travels along the south coast. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says the government will continue to track its movements.
I would prefer that it wasn't there, but we live in circumstances where just as Australia has vessels in the South China Sea and vessels in the Taiwan Strait and a range of areas, this vessel is there. What our task is to do is to make sure that we represent Australia's national interests. We do that each and every day, and I have every confidence in our Defence Force and our security agencies to do just that.
The Labor campaign is on the move this afternoon to an undisclosed location after the Prime Minister made his first stop in the West. I spoke to Tom Lowrey, who's travelling with Anthony Albanese's campaign this week, a short time ago. Tom Lowrey, thanks for joining us. Labor's again sought to put health at the front of its re-election pitch. Talk us through this latest announcement, and was the government able to keep the focus on that today?
Yeah, good afternoon, Steph. Anthony Albanese touched down in Perth late yesterday, a little earlier in the campaign than we might have expected. And as you mentioned, he's trying to keep this early campaign focus on healthcare. The campaign offering for WA this time around was $200 million for a major Perth hospital. That'll be paired with some funding from the state government to upgrade the St John of God Midland Hospital. It's a pretty busy hospital. We were there today, seeing people filing in and out. Labor has sought to keep healthcare at the top of the agenda so far in this campaign. We've seen the pictures of Anthony Albanese waving around his Medicare card. That being said, what Labor wants to talk about and what the media is going to talk about are two very different things. We saw him copping questions at the press conference today on energy prices. Again, what's happened to the Reputex modelling that Labor was relying upon at the last election campaign that sort of underpinned that promise of a $275 power price reduction. It seems that is no longer part of Labor's energy policy offering, given the response we saw from the Prime Minister to questions on that today. On top of that, there were questions about one of Labor's other central policy offerings in the last campaign, which was an Environment Protection Authority. This was a new authority Labor wanted to set up. The WA government seemed to intervene in the process there. There has been pretty widespread reporting saying the Premier, Roger Cook, was pretty integral in ensuring that wasn't legislated in this term of Parliament. Anthony Albanese says that's still part of their policy offering, but it will be a different form of EPA on the agenda next time. Other things included a Chinese spy ship currently circling the country. Anthony Albanese got questions on that too. So a few different things bubbling away under this campaign. It's never going to be what the campaign wants to talk about. There's always a few different things on the agenda.
WA was crucial to the government's victory last election. Are we expecting the Prime Minister to visit there frequently?
I'd say so, and he made that pretty clear today, saying he will be back in WA probably a few times during this election campaign. Look, as I mentioned before, I'm sort of surprised at how early we are in WA in this campaign. It is just simply a long way to go. It's a pretty solid flight, but it goes to, I suppose, the value that Labor places in WA. It was to some degree WA that delivered Labor the election last time around. They picked up 4 seats from the Liberals. One of them was Hasluck, where we were for this campaign a little earlier on today. Labor wants to hold all 4 of those seats. It wants to be competitive in Bullwinkle as well, a new seat that's been created on the outskirts of Perth too. If Labor can hang on to all 4 of those seats and potentially add a 5th, if they can be competitive there, that would go a long way to keeping the coalition out of office. It is a big ask though. There are some positive signs for Labor. WA Labor being re-elected only a few weeks ago. There is a bit of some hope there for Labor, but that being said, you could argue last time may have been a high watermark for the party.
And Tom, it's early days. You've only been out for a few days with the Prime Minister, but what's the mood in the Albanese camp so far?
Look, it seems fairly positive so far. You just had to look at the polls this morning to see there is some positive energy within the Labor campaign, and they do seem optimistic. They seem fairly energised. The Prime Minister has been travelling a lot, going from central Queensland on day one, hitting southern New South Wales, and then across the country to WA. That's a fairly rapid pace for any campaign to be taking. Anthony Albanese seems to be enjoying himself on the campaign too. He does seem fairly confident, but it is, of course, worth noting we're only a few days into this campaign. So, you know, plenty of unexpected things can happen on campaigns that could take things in a very different direction. But early on, it seems like a fairly confident and fairly optimistic vibe within the Labor camp.
Tom Lowrey, thanks for joining us and enjoy the rest of your stint in the Wild West. Well, let's hear from the other camp now. Isobel Rowe has been travelling with the opposition leader today. He was campaigning in Newcastle, where the coalition's hoping to gain a swag of seaside seats from Labor. Isobel joins us now. Thanks for joining us. The opposition leader was in the Hunter this morning. Now he's back in Queensland this afternoon. Talk us through his schedule and the seats in play.
That's right. So most of the Dutton travelling media pack are in Brisbane at the moment, as you can see. But Peter Dutton himself is out in central Queensland, in particular Thargomindah, which locals will tell you is seeing one of its worst floods, if not its worst flood, since 1974. And if you ask any Queenslander what is the worst flood they can remember, that is usually the one that they say. So Peter Dutton is there with David Littleproud. He's there with the local mayor of the Bulu Shire, John Ferguson. They are touring a quite devastated Thargomindah. There are houses underwater. According to the local mayor, there are lots of stock losses as well. In fact, the 7-metre river gauge, according to John Ferguson, is now completely invisible, so it's gone past that. There has been a commitment from the Dutton campaign, if it were to win government, a $10 million new Bureau of Meteorology gauge for that area, a new radar. It says that that's something that has been desperately needed for central Queensland, and it's something that just hasn't been done yet. That's not a political move. This is David Littleproud's seat. It's a very safe seat, but it's something that the Dutton campaign says that just really needs to be done. As you said earlier in the day, we were in the Hunter region, we were in Newcastle, and then just outside of Newcastle in Tomago at a plant called Cougar Engineering. It makes lots of mining equipment. And he went there to push his message on energy. The seat of Patterson in particular is one that is in the sights of the Dutton campaign. It's a 2.6% margin. Meryl Swanson is the Labor candidate who holds that, and it is something that the coalition believe that they can win. The seat of Hunter, of course, as well, Dan Repicoli's seat, that's something also that the coalition has their eyes on. And in those seats, they're talking about energy, they're talking about nuclear. Peter Dutton said today that he thought people had a higher IQ for energy in those seats. So those are the sorts of messages he's hoping cuts through in that area.
And you mentioned Peter Dutton was focusing on energy policy again today. Can you talk us through the details of what exactly he's been talking about?
Yeah, so he was asked quite a few questions about the coalition's gas plan. This is the plan to bring between 10 or 20% of supply or keep it onshore instead of exporting it. Peter Dutton says that will bring down or bring up gas supply and therefore bring down power prices. He's been asked repeatedly today and over previous days exactly how much it will bring down power prices. And he hasn't been able to say. He has said that there will be some modelling released at some point. He says it will be in the next couple of weeks, at least before the election. But they're repeated questions that he's getting. He's used phrases like stabilising and also reducing power bills. but hasn't been able to be specific. He was also asked today about nuclear. The Hunter, of course, is a key region if this plan were to go ahead. Liddell Power Station, just west of Newcastle, is going to be one of those sites that Peter Dutton has promised to transform into a nuclear power station. So he's been asked about whether or not locals are happy with that idea. He thinks that they are.
And Isobel, I know these things are kept tightly under wraps, but where are you expecting to go next? Do you have any idea at this stage?
Nope. Not at all. All we know is that Peter Dutton is on his way back. We are going to be in Brisbane tonight because Mr Dutton does have some media commitments. Later he's doing a pub politics event with Sky News later tonight. All the media are being bussed to see that. But as for tomorrow's plans, I don't know, and I may not know till much later tonight.
Well, we look forward to seeing where you end up. Thanks so much for joining us, Isobel. And let's speak to one of Labor's campaign spokespeople, Education Minister Jason Clare. He's joining us from the ABC's new Parramatta studios. Minister, thanks for joining us. Can I just ask you on power prices, can voters expect that they'll go up when the government's energy rebate runs out at the end of the year?
Well, they can expect that power prices will go up if Peter Dutton wins the election. You know, what we know from the $600 billion nuclear reactor policy that he's put in place is experts say power prices could go up by up to an extra $1,000 a year. You know, these things will take 20 years to build. They won't turn a light on for probably 10 or 15 years. And when they do, they'll only produce, I think, about 4% of the energy that Australia needs. But Aussies will have to start paying for them from the 4th of May.
But if Labor wins the election, what will happen once that energy rebate wraps up? Will power prices increase?
Well, what we know is power prices will be lower under Labor than they will be under Peter Dutton. Here's the sort of challenge, Steph, that we're faced with. All of those old coal-fired power stations that are providing electricity for Australia right around the country, they're running out of puff. There hasn't been a day, I think, in the last 2 years where one of them hasn't been offline. So they've got to be replaced, and there's a couple of options. You can either replace them with another coal-fired power station, or you can replace them with renewables backed up by gas and battery, or you can replace them with these nuclear reactors that Peter Dutton's talking about. Now, the cheapest and the fastest way to do this is by replacing them with wind and solar, with renewable energy backed up by gas and batteries. The most expensive way to do this is to build nuclear reactors around the country, which is Peter Dutton's great idea. You know, his big policies for this election are to increase your taxes, to build nuclear reactors, and also to make you pay for your boss's lunch. And I don't think that's a recipe that Australians would like very much at all.
You've mentioned the opposition. We've heard opposition leader Peter Dutton promise power prices will be lower if he's elected. While in opposition, you did the same. Do you regret making that promise?
Well, I think Peter Dutton's just trying to con the Australian people. You know, we know that these nuclear reactors are going to cost a bomb, that they're going to take too long to build, and that Australians are going to have to pay more for them now. You know, Australians know this, and I think the policy that he's attempted to distract Australians with over the last 48 or 72 hours about gas is just that. It's a distraction to hide the fact that these nuclear reactors are about as popular as a snake in a sleeping bag. He knows it, and the Australian people know it.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister appeared to walk away from modelling underpinning Labor's promise to cut power bills. At the time, in 2022, Anthony Albanese said it was the most comprehensive modelling ever done for any policy by any opposition, but it seems not comprehensive enough, perhaps. Does Labor stand by this modelling?
To be fair, Steph, you know, what the Prime Minister said is that since that modelling was done, we've had the biggest energy crisis the world's faced since I was a kid in the 1970s. What we're doing here is making sure that we replace those old coal-fired power stations with the cheapest form of new energy available. That's renewable energy that's backed up by gas and backed up with batteries as well. It's the cheapest way to do it, and it's the fastest way to do it. The worst way to do it is rolling out nuclear reactors that'll take 20 years to build, that won't, as I said, turn a light on for probably 15 years, that'll only produce a minuscule amount of the total energy that we as a country need, and that Australians are going to have to pay a fortune for right now.
Moving on to supermarkets, the government's promised to outlaw price gouging. When you look at the detail, it seems that a task force will be established to consider a new law to ban unfair pricing. It's not quite outlawing, is it?
Well, it'll provide us with the advice we need for the legislation that we need to put in place the sort of fines to stop this happening. You know, I think most Australians watching today will know they're being ripped off at the supermarket. One of the ways the big supermarket chains do this is by increasing prices. Then they drop them by a little bit and they call it a sale, or they shrink the size of the packet and they charge you the same amount of money, or price gouging, what we were talking about yesterday, which is really just charging excessive amounts of money for a product because they can, because there's not another product in the market, because there's not enough competition. Now, in the UK, the POMs have done this. In Europe, they've done this as well. They've done it in, I think, 30 states in the US, where you can outlaw this and put in place the sort of serious fines to stop the big supermarket chains doing this. We've already put in place fines for the supermarkets that come into effect, I think, tomorrow, where they're ripping off farmers and suppliers, and those fines are as big as $10 million or 10% of the turnover of a big company like Woolies and Coles. That's a big amount of money. And we've made it very clear in this announcement that we're prepared to do the same here when it comes to the sort of price gouging that can happen at the supermarket.
The Prime Minister spent the day in Western Australia. How confident are you in terms of holding on to the red wall seats, as they're called, that delivered you the victory in 2022? Seats like Tangney, for example.
Well, we've got to work hard to earn the support and the votes of Australians right across the country, whether it's in Western Sydney, where I am today, or whether it's in Western Australia. And we don't take any seat for granted. You know, by contrast, I think that Peter Dutton is already not only drawing up the curtains at Kirribilli, but he's opening them up and looking across the harbour at maybe the place where he just did a fundraiser with Justin Hems, raising, I think, $500,000 for the Liberal Party, when he should have been up in Queensland preparing for the cyclone. He said today, his big announcement today was that if he wins the election, he's going to live at Kirribilli. Now, he shouldn't be thinking about where he's going to live. He should be thinking about what he's going to do. He doesn't have very much to offer the Australian people, except he's going to increase their taxes. He's going to build $600 billion worth of nuclear reactors. Extraordinarily, he's got this policy that says that he wants us to all pay for our bosses' lunches. And now his other big idea is that he's going to live at Kirribilli. It's very, very strange.
We're expecting Donald Trump's next round of tariffs to take effect this week. He was asked about them on Air Force One today, where he says he'll be kinder and more generous than other countries have been to the US. Let's take a quick listen.
Tariffs will be far more generous than those countries were to us, meaning they will be kinder than those countries were to the United States of America over the decades. They ripped us off like no country's ever been ripped off in history. And we're going to be much nicer than they were to us, but it's substantial money for the country.
Jason Clare, listening to that, does that give you any comfort that Australia might not be hit too hard by this second round?
Well, I won't preempt what announcements might be made by the US administration later in the week, but the truth is that the United States has a 2-to-1 trade surplus with Australia. In other words, they sell twice as much to us as we sell to them. I think only about 5% of the goods that we produce in Australia and sell to the world, we sell to the United States. So we'll wait and see what the announcement is by the US later in the week. At a diplomatic level, we're engaging with our US counterparts. Of course, whatever decision the US makes in relation to tariffs for other countries all around the world will also have an impact on Australia, because we're part of a global market.
Now, once again, the issue of deportation for people in Australia who've committed serious crimes but are stateless has come up today. 3 cases of people who were due to be sent to Nauru under the new laws are stalled in the courts, including the High Court. Have you managed to send anyone in the NZYQ cohort to Nauru yet?
Well, we have acted as you would expect us to act. The High Court said that these individuals couldn't be detained. And so we're taking steps working with Nauru to make sure that people can be sent to Nauru. And they're the sort of actions that you'd expect us as a government to make.
Beyond Nauru, what's Labor's plan to deal with this going forward?
Well, we're going to make sure that people who break the law are locked up. It's as simple as that.
Jason Clare, I also wanted to ask you about your comments yesterday about your colleague Tony Burke, who had to cancel a Muslim prayer event due to security concerns. You've seen a lot of election campaigns in your time. Does the temperature feel particularly elevated in this one?
You know, I think over the next few weeks, temperatures will be elevated in different parts of the country, particularly when pre-poll starts and people are handing out how-to votes and asking people for their support. The important thing here is that democracy should be allowed to take place in our country the way it always has. We're lucky in Australia that we haven't seen the sort of violence or threats of violence that we've seen recently in America or in recent times in the UK. And I hope that that continues here in Australia. Most of the time, you know, I'm just speaking for myself, when I'm standing out the front of the shops and talking to voters, people who like me will come up and say good day. People who don't might give me a piece of their mind or mumble it under their breath as they walk past. But there's no violence or there's no threats of violence, and I hope that that continues.
Last election, you won your Western Sydney seat just on first preferences. Are you concerned that this time around, anger at the government over its handling of the war in Gaza in particular, your seat has a high proportion of Middle Eastern voters, will mean that you have to rely on other preferences?
Oh, look, my community is suffering and feeling the impact of the war in Gaza very acutely, and that's because this is not a war on the other side of the world for them. This is much closer to home. Sometimes the people that they see that are injured or have died on their TV screens are family, so they feel it acutely. But this isn't the only issue that's affecting the people in my local community. They care just as deeply about jobs, about Medicare, about funding for our schools, about cutting the cost of HECS, for example. You know, Peter Dutton was out in this neck of the woods the other day trying to con people, trying to convince people to vote for him. People of Western Sydney aren't going to be conned by Peter Dutton. Remember, this is the guy who said not so long ago that it was a mistake for Australia to let people from Lebanon come and live here. And if he thinks that, you know, 5 minutes to midnight or 5 weeks before an election, that the people of my community, that the people of Western Sydney are going to forget that, then I think he underestimates the people of Western Sydney.
You're often utilised by Labor in campaigns. Do you expect you'll need to spend more time in your seat this time as a result of that anger, trying to shore up votes?
Well, Steph, I'm only, I reckon, a couple of kilometres outside my seat as we speak, which makes it easy to come and talk to you from time to time. But I'll spend a lot of time as campaign spokesperson talking about Labor's plan to cut taxes, Labor's plan to make it easier to see a doctor for free, and Labor's plan to cut the HECS debt of 3 million Australians by 20% if we win the election. But also plenty of time in my local electorate, knocking on doors, talking to people, and hopefully being successful in winning my seat of Blaxland again and winning the next election and returning an Albanese Labor government.
Now, Jason Clare, just on a few other issues while we wait for our next guest. Lucky you, more time with me.
This is called stretching, isn't it?
This is called interrogating all of the possible topics that we have, and this one's on your portfolio. I actually did have a question on youth allowance. The budget revealed that expenditure related to the youth allowance payments is expected to decrease by almost $500 million over the next 4 years. Treasury says fewer people are taking it up. As Education Minister, can you shed any light on why that might be?
In the budget, we've increased funding for youth allowance. Now, I'm not sure about the take-up rates, Steph, but over the course of the last few budgets, we've increased funding there. Also, we've increased rent assistance that helps a lot of students with the cost of living. One of the things that a lot of students have asked me to assist with is financial support while they do their practical training, the practical part of their university degrees. And on the 1st of July, paid prac or financial support for teaching students will start, as well as nursing students, as well as midwifery students and social work students. That's real financial support for students while they're at university. Often they have to give up their part-time job, or they have to move from one place to another in order to do that paid training, that unpaid training, I should say. And that financial support will make a world of difference for lots of students.
Jason Clare, thank you so much for spending a lot of time with us this afternoon on Afternoon Briefing.
No worries. Thanks very much.
Over the weekend, Peter Dutton confirmed he'll ditch Labor's plan to co-host a global UN climate change meeting with the Pacific, claiming Australian taxpayers would have to pay tens of billions of dollars to host the event, a figure analysts have dismissed.
I saw the Prime Minister out this morning catching up with an elderly Australian. I hope he told that lady that, yes, she's struggling obviously with the cost of living crisis under Labor, but the government's planning to spend tens of billions of taxpayers' dollars on hosting a COP process that's not going to bring down power prices and is going to sign a Labor government up to giving tens or hundreds of billions of dollars out to third-party countries. I mean, it's just, it's madness. So that's not something we're supporting.
Now let's bring in our political panel for today, Green Senator Barbara Pocock and Nationals MP Michael McCormack. Welcome to you both.
Welcome,
Hi,
Barbara.
Steph.
Welcome, Stephanie. Hi.
Hi, Mike.
We'll start off with Opposition Leader Peter Dutton confirming he'll ditch Labor's plans to co-host the COP 2026 summit. He says it's madness. Michael McCormack, you're the Shadow Minister for the Pacific. Are you worried this is going to antagonise friends in a geopolitically critical region?
No, I think the Pacific knows full well my views on the fact that we need to do everything we can to lift women's health, to make sure that we get vaccines out there, obviously keep up all that we're doing as far as infrastructure is concerned, building seawalls, making sure that buildings are cyclone-proof, and we do that very well. We've spoken as one with the Pacific. Labor is built on what Maurice Payne and Julie Bishop and others have done with the Step Up, with the Pacific. The Pacific knows full well that we are their best friends and we will continue to be so.
But Michael McCormack, are you concerned about what message this sends to Pacific leaders?
What we need to do is make sure that we spend the money that taxpayers give us on practical and sensible means to bring their cost of living pressures down. That's the priority of what we're doing, and that's what we'll continue to be focused on.
Barbara Pocock, can I just get your take on what you think about Peter Dutton's pledge to ditch hosting COP 2026 if he wins the election?
It's a step in the absolutely wrong direction. If I think about the number of Pacific leaders who have been through our parliament in the last several years begging us to be more attentive to the existential crisis being created in Pacific nations through rising sea levels, through extreme storms. These are countries at the forefront of the climate crisis, and it is vitally important that we as a Pacific neighbour play our role in drawing international attention to their plight, making sure we have the responses we need in a climate crisis, and certainly hosting an international meeting which draws attention to the consequences, the real events that are unfolding in the Pacific and in our own country, of course, dealing with extreme droughts, the bushfires, floods, the kinds of cyclone Queensland's just experienced. This is a pressing international issue, especially as we watch Trump leadership in the US retreat from the recognition of the kind of crisis that many countries, and especially in the Pacific, are suffering from.
Michael McCormack, Mr Dutton claimed the event will cost tens of billions of dollars to host, but experts say that's not the case. The real cost would be at most around $200 million, a stark difference. Did Mr Dutton make an error here, or did he misspeak?
Well, at the end of the day, what could we spend the money that we would otherwise be spending on what could be a talk fest? So we could spend it on regional hospitals. We could spend it on mental health care right throughout the regions. We could be spending it on making sure that our emergency services have the equipment and the personnel training that they need. There's so many other things that you could spend it on rather than getting everybody jetting in, everybody flying in for what sometimes, we looked at the last conference that was held, and I've got to say there are a lot of people there who could have stayed at home, quite frankly.
But there's a big difference between tens of billions of dollars and $200 million. What happened here? Was it just a mistake?
Well, I'm no expert on what it might cost, but let me tell you, it costs a lot of money, and there's a lot of taxpayers out there who think that money could be spent better elsewhere.
Barbara Pocock, I'll just ask you, this comes as Labor won't publicly commit to a 2035 emissions reduction target until after the election. Are you concerned that climate's falling down the list of priorities for the major parties?
I think lots of Australians are extremely concerned about the climate crisis. They are feeling it as they watch their televisions every night, and many are experiencing it directly. Here in South Australia, where I am today, we have a historic drought underway. In Queensland, we're watching yet again floods unfolding. We're just recovering from Cyclone Alfred. We are in the grip of a climate crisis now. It's not theoretical. People care about it. Of course, the cost of living pressures are really pressing on Australians. I was door knocking in our most marginal seat yesterday here in Sturt. Every door where there was someone answering wanted to talk about grocery prices, wanted to talk about the cost of living, of housing and rents. So those issues, of course, are front of mind. But climate crisis has a very significant effect already on our budget and on our country, and certainly across into the Pacific, as we discussed earlier.
Michael McCormack, we heard Peter Dutton today declare power prices would be lower under a coalition government, but he didn't outline when he'll do that or by how much. Shouldn't that be on the table at this stage in the game?
Well, what is on the table is our national gas plan, and that will reduce energy prices. And if you bring more gas in the market, that will lead to a reduction in prices. So Western Australia has had a gas reserve allocation in since 2006, and of course they were doing a lot more before that. What we need to do is we need to cut the green tape and the red tape and every other tape when it comes to the Northwest Shelf. Make sure that we've got the right priority with the Beetaloo Basin. There's so much gas in Australia. We've got the Victorian state looking as though they're going to put an import terminal so that they can bring probably Australian gas back into feeding into their market. Australians are very worried about their electricity prices, their power prices. And I hope Barbara, when she was door knocking that very marginal seat, told the people who she spoke to, as well as what she talked to them about climate. I hope she said that the LNP has very much a policy to get Australians back on track, and we definitely need to. We definitely need to bring those cost of living pressures down, and we will do that. We'll do it with the gas reserve. We'll do it with certainly making sure that people can have their petrol excise halved. That's going to lead to a considerable saving, $14 a tank for the average household. These are good policies. We've outlined them, and of course, as we near the election, we'll outline even more policies to help bring cost of living pressures to each and every household, factory and farm.
Well, I'm guessing that Barbara Pocock, as a Green senator, wasn't outlining the LNP's policy here.
I hope she was.
No, I was talking to the people out there about what we need to do, certainly around electricity prices. I mean, we have a gas cartel in this country at present who are exporting 80% of our gas, and we've got a Labor government that's opening more and more fossil fuel projects, gas and coal. We've got Peter Dutton saying a very vague policy, and what we need to do long term is get households off gas, off fossil fuel, onto renewables. They'll be cheaper in the longer run. We have put forward already a series of policies that will help electrify our households and our small businesses long term, driving down that price of power and helping people do what they want to do. A lot of households in Australia want to electrify their households. It's cost that stands in the way, and we've got policies out there. We'd like to see a policy war unfold around the electrification of our households. We've made a very strong intervention, and we'd love to see other parties picking it up, which would see support for those households where cost is a barrier to help them electrify, and in the long run lower prices, and most importantly action which will move us to renewables and deal with that climate crisis I was talking about earlier. There are lots of things we can do. We certainly need to bring that gas cartel back under control and get more gas into the Australian economy as we make the transition. But our real solution long term is renewables. It's not nuclear. It's not some vague plan for a nuclear dream in the future. future. We need practical solutions now that move us quickly to renewables for the sake of our climate crisis and to get those costs down.
So Barbara Pocock, what do you think needs to happen in order for power prices to come down?
We need to assist those households who want to move to electrification and for whom cost is a barrier. So we have a plan to assist small business and households to make that move, to electrify their cooktop and their water heating systems. There's a lot of things that can be done immediately that will assist and in the long run get us to where we need to do, which is cheaper renewables that deal with the climate crisis and assist those households. And we need to do some other things too. Of course, we need to deal with price gouging in our supermarket system, which is a major challenge for Australians. A very wealthy country, you can't get your essentials within a household budget in too many Australian households right now. And we took a bill to do this a year ago to the Australian Parliament, and Labor at that time voted against it. It's time to move on price gouging, to have strong penalties, a strong cop on the beat, and to force through the ACCC divestiture from those big duopolies who are ripping off Australian households at present. Other countries do it, we could do it now, and it's time to make the move. And we've got some other ideas that we think Labor should be picking up on. We certainly are happy to share that one with Labor and see them backing it today. But a few other things we could do: dental into Medicare, rent caps, wiping all student debt. These are things that the Greens are taking to this election. They're viable propositions if we properly tax big corporations where a third actually pay no tax at present, including many gas companies.
You mentioned supermarkets, and Michael McCormack, I wanted to ask you, the retailers lobby says the coalition's plan to create powers that could break up the big supermarket chains could actually drive up grocery prices if they were used. Is divestiture poorly thought out here?
Oh, look, I think if you ask the same question to our farmers who are price takers, not price makers, I think if you ask the same question to struggling households, they would give you a completely different excuse and reason as to why we need divestiture powers, why we need a tough supermarket commissioner to make sure that we very much penalise supermarkets if they are in fact price gouging. And, you know, it's not only small businesses and households that Barbara's referred to. I spoke to Chris Cummins, who runs an abattoir at Cowra today. They are paying so much for their power. There are so many people who are paying so much more now than what they were 3 years ago. And these people need relief. These people need help. And we'll provide it with the plans and the policies that we're taking to the election, including supermarket powers, which are very tough but very necessary.
Barbara Pocock, the Greens have also supported divestiture powers. Do you appreciate there could be some unintended consequences?
No, I think it's a very important policy we should consider alongside reining in that price gouging. Australians who visit the supermarket, Woolies or Coles, know that price gouging is real. They know they're paying a price for it, and we need to be dealing with both stopping that gouging, creating real penalties for people who do it, and where it's shown to occur, have that powerful body to deal with the concentration of power. Australians suffer from a concentration of ownership in the banking sector, in the supermarket sector, and we need to be dealing with it much more firmly. As a wealthy country, too many people are struggling to meet their basic needs, and that is why we need both things, the divestiture and an end to price gouging.
Now, just quickly before I let both of you go, as the campaign enters its first full week, 3 major opinion polls have Labor and the coalition statistically tied around the 50-50 mark, which would most likely see the government return to power. Michael McCormack, I'll ask you first, do these polls give you cause for concern?
If you don't like one poll one day, wait, there'll be another one tomorrow. They're like the daily newspaper. If you don't like what's on the front page, wait, there'll be another one tomorrow. You might like it better. Look, there's only one opinion poll that matters. That's going to be the ballot. We start voting on April 22 and right up leading up to the 3rd of May. That's going to be the important poll. That's going to be the only poll that matters. That's the poll. That's the opinion poll, the national one I'll be looking at.
And Barbara Pocock, some polling's indicating a minority government certainly is on the cards. Yeah. The Prime Minister's ruled out a coalition with the Greens. Do you believe that would hold in the case of a minority government?
Look, a minority government, everything is up in the air. What we will be pushing for in the Greens is outcomes that make a difference for the Australian population. We want to see dental into Medicare. We want to see all student debt wiped, and we want to see caps on rents and an end to new coal and gas. These are things that we've been talking about for a long time from our point of view in the Greens. We want to see them discussed, and as is predicted by almost all the polls, certainly a minority government. I think it's very interesting that these latest polls take a couple of percentage points off the coalition, and I'm really interested in the fact that the couple of places where they've actually been explicit about what they really will do, for example, cut 41,000 public servants and do away with working from home, they've paid a real price for those things because they don't understand the modern workplace and the modern household. And I think what we want to see in the Greens is a strong public sector that is liberated from too many consultants who rip Australians off and which provide the services in the health system, in our Services Australia and for veterans that Australians know they need.
All right, we'll leave it there. Barbara Pocock and Michael McCormack, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Steph. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Barbara.
Opposition leader Peter Dutton repeated his promise today that power prices will be cheaper under a coalition government and says more detail is coming. Mr Dutton was asked repeatedly about whether prices would come down and sought instead to draw a contrast between the two parties' energy policies.
There are two offerings at the next election, Andrew. One is from the government, which is guaranteeing you that electricity prices will go higher if Labor's re-elected. Right, let's be clear about that. Electricity and gas is up by 32% and 34% now. Mr Albanese's plan promises Australians that they will pay more for electricity and gas after the election. Our plan, which is to create an East Coast reserve, brings more gas into the system. If we bring more gas into the system, and don't forget that gas is not just used at home, but natural gas is used to generate electricity. And it will be across the economy, not just in households, but in businesses like this one, which will benefit. We will have, in terms of our offering at the next election, to the Australian people, a definite plan about how we can reduce prices. Not just keep downward pressure, but I want to reduce power prices.
And over in the West, Anthony Albanese responded to questions about the government's own modelling on power prices used before the 2022 election, which promised a $275 reduction in power prices by 2025. The Prime Minister pointed to the coalition's lack of a 2030 target instead.
He doesn't have a 2030 target. He doesn't have a 2030 target. We have a 2030 target. We're confident we'll meet it. And our policy is very clear. Our policy is for, same as this bloke's policy, that he just got elected and won a few seats, 46 seats here in WA on, and the Liberal Party were reduced to 7 and they just pipped the Nats on 6. Our policy is for renewables, backed with firming capacity of gas, batteries and hydro. That's our policy.
Let's bring in Grattan Institute's Energy Director Tony Wood to unpack this complicated discussion over gas. Tony, thanks so much for joining us. Gas is shaping up to be a flashpoint in this campaign, but the power system is incredibly complex. Can you firstly break down for us whether we have enough gas currently for the domestic market or do we need more?
Well, I guess, Dev, the first thing we have to recognise in the political world of this energy debate is that actually most of the things that cause energy prices to go up or down are actually outside the influence of governments, and they're weather related or they're overseas related, like the war in Ukraine. So governments need to be very careful about either blaming someone for things that happen that they don't like or taking credit for things they do. Now, in terms of gas has been our friend in Australia for 60 or 70 years. It's been a reliable and valuable source of energy, and there was a time when gas was cheap and solar was expensive. But that all changed 10, 15 years ago. And it's not going to go back the way that we'd wish. And that was illustrated in the previous coalition government when we had the so-called gas-led recovery. But Peter Dutton is correct that gas prices have gone up consistently over the last several years. They've gone up more than electricity prices have gone up. And gas does play into electricity because when the ageing coal-fired power stations run into trouble, the thing we turn to is gas. And gas is an expensive form of producing electricity, and so as a consequence that does have some impact on prices. So the questions that Peter Dutton is asking about have we got enough gas at the right price are absolutely the right ones. What's missing is, well, what are you going to do about it? At the moment, so far, we only have a vague commitment, and both sides of government, I think, haven't really worked out what their long-term view about gas is and how they would make sure that we continue to have reliable gas while we need it.
The coalition has two prongs to its policy. One is to fast-track approvals for new gas projects, and secondly, there's the East Coast gas reservation policy. Will this get more gas in the system and push down prices as promised? Well, so far on the first one, there's no indication of where this gas would come from. There is suggestions that some gas projects are being held up by regulatory problems, and that's true of a big project in the North West Shelf. That's got nothing to do with the East Coast. There is a project in New South Wales that's been held up for a long time. Maybe that would help. But most of the activity to try and get more gas into Victoria, where we're running out of gas, is not going to get gas into Victoria. There's some exploration off the coast of Victoria that may result in more gas down the track a bit, but again, that's not being affected by what the opposition is proposing. So they're very unclear as to what gas is going to be released or made available to the East Coast, in what time frame and from where. And if it's not close to Victoria already, how it will get into the southeast, including Victoria, as the gas here in Victoria is all running out. Now, that's the big thing. The second thing is having some form of reservation policy. Now, the idea that we'll reserve enough gas for ourselves and then we'll export the rest sounds simple, but it's far from simple in practice. The idea that we can reserve gas for ourselves by itself is okay, but at what price? We have not run out of gas on the East Coast over the last 8-9 years since Malcolm Turnbull put in place what's called the Australian Domestic Gas Security Mechanism. It works. The current government has continued to use that mechanism to make sure that the domestic market is supplied. Yes, it's running down, but that's not where the problem is. The frustration for both sides of politics is that the price at which that gas which gets into the domestic market from the exporters in Queensland is too high. And they have not identified how would they actually get the price down. It's a very unclear concept, but to be fair, neither has the Labor government been found a way to get that gas price down. Either they had a $12 price cap on gas, that's not really worked. The price stubbornly sits at around $14 a gigajoule. So the coalition is arguing that high gas prices are part of the reason why power bills are going up. You've touched on this, but I just wanted to clarify. If gas prices come down, does that mean that power bills also come down?
Well, that depends on, there's two steps there. If gas prices come down, that is a good thing in itself, right? Now, the question about what will do to power prices, and I've not seen any analysis done by the opposition, and it's not simple analysis to do. It's how much gas do we use for power generation anyway? Because most of the time we don't use much gas. The gas is there as a backup when things get tight. For example, June, July last year, we had cold weather, we had shortages of wind and solar, we had shortages of hydro from Tasmania, and it looked like we might run out of gas because the gas was needing to be pumped into the power system then. It worked, the system survived, but it did push up the price in that quarter, the middle part of last year. So if we do continue to use gas, even if the price was to come down to $10 a gigajoule, it's still not cheap gas, and it's not the sort of gas-led recovery that the coalition government was talking about previously. So I'm all for finding ways to get the cost of gas down, because I do think that the gas price we're paying in the east coast of Australia is higher than it should be, but I'm not sure yet I've seen any clear policy from either side of government that would bring that price down.
Peter Dutton has vowed power prices will be cheaper under a coalition government. He hasn't said by how much, but he says there's modelling to prove it that hasn't been released. You've been through a lot of campaigns. Do you think at this point in the campaign leaders should be releasing their modelling?
Well, yes, but it'd be more important to release their assumptions, because we've seen modelling released in the past, and if you ask me what answer you want, Steph, I could give you, I'd set up my model so you can get that answer. It's not the modelling that's the question, it's what do you have to assume in that modelling to achieve whatever the other side of politics is promising? Because over the last 20 years, we've had governments over and over again promise, usually based upon some economic modelling, that prices are going to come down by so much, by some date, whatever. It doesn't happen. It's never happened, and I don't think it ever will, because there are things that cause prices to go up and down, but rarely are they caused by government policy. So I think we have to be very careful about this, and I think governments themselves should be far more careful about making promises on things over which actually they don't have that much control.
Tony, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Steph.
Labor over the weekend pledged to outlaw supermarket price gouging if re-elected, despite an ACCC report that said it couldn't substantiate allegations price gouging was taking place. For more on this, let's bring in former ACCC Chair Alan Fells. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Steph.
The government's vowed to outlaw supermarket price gouging, but the details of the policy show that they'll establish a task force that will actually look at whether tougher laws to ban unfair pricing are needed. Does this go far enough?
Well, it goes as far as it can, and I actually, I think that in the end they'll recommend the introduction of the European law and the UK law test of excessive prices. There are laws there prohibiting excessive prices across the board for all industry, and I think actually we should do something like that, providing there are multiple safeguards to prevent the cure being worse than the disease.
You mentioned the EU law. I wanted to ask you about that. How does that work overseas, and could that effectively work in Australia?
Yes, by adding on to our competition law, the same as in the European and the UK competition law, a prohibition on excessive prices, and then it would be up to a court of law following an ACCC application to declare if the prices are excessive and to impose any orders to reduce them or to impose fines. It's very rarely, it's just occasionally used in the UK and the EU, and with great caution.
Is the definition of price gouging clear enough? We heard the Prime Minister give a blunt assessment yesterday. I can think of no one better placed to explain it than you. Can you walk us through what it is?
Well, I recently did a report entitled Price Gouging, but I didn't say that the supermarkets were doing price gouging. I said their prices were well above levels that would apply in a more competitive market, levels that might apply in the UK, the US. And in looking at excessive prices, I think of prices that greatly exceed costs and a reasonable profit, that also reflect a very significant lack of competition. There's no one number or magic set of words that defines an excessive price. I do believe there are such things. I think the term price gouging is not terribly helpful in this context.
If that's the case and it's not helpful in this context, how difficult is it then for a task force to then examine the laws as they exist?
I'm pretty sure they'll recommend we copy the EU law. Although I don't believe myself that supermarkets in general price gouge, they charge prices that are well above what would happen if there's competition. I do think the recent allegations in court about Woolies and Coles putting up prices temporarily for a few days, say by 10%, then dropping them by, say, 5%, and then saying there's a price cut, that to me is price gouging, unfairly exploiting consumers.
During a campaign fought on cost of living issues, how much of this policy is political versus a pragmatic attempt to drive down costs?
Well, I think it's certain that both its policy and the coalition's about bringing in a divestiture law will at best have small marginal downward effects on prices. No miracles will be achieved. The politicians are clearly responding to immense public concern about supermarket prices. Most people I know think they're excessive, and maybe the politicians are doing the minimum amount they think they can get away with to reflect a concern of the public.
The retailers' lobby says the coalition's plan to create powers that could break up the big supermarket chains could drive up grocery prices if they were used. Can I just ask for your response to that?
Yes, now I have long been an advocate of us joining the US and other countries in having a general divestiture power for the whole competition law, and retail would not be on my top 10 list for possible divestiture. If it were, however, applied to divestiture, it's not clear it would bring a benefit because there are some economies of scale and size which could be sacrificed.
Just on this law to outlaw, the vow to outlaw price gouging, is this law toothless if the ACCC hasn't actually found any evidence of price gouging?
Well, I think that's significant. I think it's probably true to say that the term price gouging doesn't appear in the economics textbooks or lexicons that they've read. They're terribly reluctant to use it. A better term would be something like excessive pricing, but even that is somewhat unclear. But a price well above costs and above competitive levels could take it to being excessive.
Now, on another cost of living measure, you have concerns over the fuel excise cut the coalition is proposing. Can you walk us through those?
I'm not concerned about what they're doing. It does bring a benefit. I just would like to mention that probably there'll have to be some price laws accompanying the cuts to make sure the benefit is passed on to consumers and not pocketed by oil companies and service stations. When you're going for a price reduction, business is always a bit slow to reduce prices. They tend to pocket the benefit for a while, and that is a concern about the fuel price reduction unless it's accompanied by some form of price regulation.
Alan Fells, thank you so much for joining us today. We always appreciate your insights on Afternoon Briefing.
Thank you.
And that's Afternoon Briefing for today. Stay with us here on ABC News. Joe O'Brien is up next with today's top stories. See you soon.